So welcome everyone. We're really pleased to have our next installment of this SEA's Dean's Invited Speaker Series, Yale Engineering Dean's Invited Speaker Series. I'm forgetting my own branding. Extremely pleased to have a great friend and eminent alumna, Lori Goler here, class of 91. I was just 1 year later. She's had a storied career at many different important institutions, including Disney, and then I guess eBay as well. And I'm probably missing a number of things in between.
All the startups that failed in between.
Right, which we talked a little about earlier. And now runs human resources, or people, I guess you call it, at Meta, which I think should give her a great opportunity to address some of the questions and concerns you might have about what it might look like to show up in her office one day in the future. What we'd love to do is just give you the opportunity first to just talk a little bit about your career trajectory and your career narrative, and then just have some Q&A, and then we'll open it up to you folks.
Great,
so
great. Well, thank you very much for having me, Dean Brock. It's really an honor to be back here. It's kind of crazy to be back here, but I love coming back to campus. And thank you to Elizabeth, who really helped set up the session. But most of all, thank you to all of you. I know how busy students are. I have 2 college kids. I can't believe that you actually made it here into this room. So wanted to say thank you for taking the time, and I hope it'll be helpful and useful. Louder? Yes, okay. Thank you. So I graduated in 91 and took kind of a windy road in my career, I would say. I've often said that I have thought of my career more as a jungle gym than a ladder, where you're kind of, going from rung to rung rather than kind of straight up in front of you, because I've done and tried lots of different things. I've always loved something that Steve Jobs actually said in 2005, I think it was, at Stanford graduation, which is that it's much easier to connect the dots looking back on your career than looking forward on your career. It's really hard to know as you're looking ahead what that's going to look like. But now I have many decades to be able to look back on, and have kind of come up with some themes that I think have guided some of the decisions I've made. When I graduated, I didn't have a lot of direction. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I thought it was a year of recession, which you might remember. Yes. I don't know if it was over by the time you got out. But what that meant is you didn't have 2 or 3 or 4 job offers. You kind of had to do, what was in front of you in a lot of cases. And I actually had planned to go work at a government agency in DC, moved down there, the whole thing, ended up not working there. So decided to take the time to kind of try a bunch of things to try to at least cross some things off the list. Like, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that. And kind of eventually ended up in a nonprofit role, starting a nonprofit back in California, which is where I had started. And there were a lot of things I really loved about that. And I loved the entrepreneurial spirit. I loved kind of being able to do all the functions and hiring teams and working with partners and all of those sorts of things. But I really thought that I wanted something a little bit faster paced, and I really wanted to get kind of back into industry, but it's very hard to make that move. So I had to think about kind of like, what are the stepping stones that I can take to get back there? And I used graduate school to do it. So I did a dual degree program, which meant I had 3 years, which importantly meant I had 2 summers. The summers are really important to get various kinds of experience. I used the first summer as kind of a closer stepping stone to work in healthcare, worked in like a corporate dev group at a healthcare company. And then the second summer went to Disney, and then ended up back at Disney after business school, and was there in kind of a strategy finance type of job for a few years, and then left to join a startup that was a brand new online retail startup. It was kind of the day when everybody was just coming online, and AOL was a really big deal. And I did a couple of startups and ended up in the Bay Area through a variety of circumstances. And then ended up at eBay, where I worked for 5 years. And my role there was to start the buyer marketing sort of department, I guess. eBay, of course, is a marketplace with buyers and sellers. They had done a lot of marketing to sellers because that's where the revenue comes from, but they hadn't really quite started the buyer marketing yet. That's what I had done at the startup, so went ahead and joined them. But one of the great things about the startup experience is that you get to do a little bit of everything. So you can, it was called baby style. I ran merchandising, I ran the warehouse, I took out the trash, I hired people, I kind of did a little bit of everything. And then you just can kind of take what you liked from it and move on to the next thing. And then from eBay, went to, at the time, Facebook, now Meta, in June 2008, and joined Meta, not in any job I'd ever done before, but in a job running recruiting, which led to the head of HR job just a few months later. And I've been doing that for 16 years. So after a lot of moving around, I kind of landed in a spot and have been pretty stable there for a while. But I'd say that, when I said you can kind of look back on your career and see the themes, I think the things that I was looking for really were, I wanted to be at companies that were doing something that I thought was good for the world or kind of had a positive impact in the world. It's one of the things I took away from nonprofit, was that I like that idea of kind of doing things that are good in the world. I wanted to be in a role that mattered. There are some roles that are kind of more important than other roles at companies, given just their point in time and what they're doing and where they are. And then I really want to work with amazing people. And so those are the things that I've really optimized for, because I think you learn so much from the people who are around you while you're kind of out in the world working. And as I've thought about what can you learn from this crazy mashup of experiences? I think the first thing is, if you have direction and you know what you want to do, that's great, and you should go do that and go deep in it and go fast, because that's, that'll really help you. But if you don't, that's okay too. And I think you don't just want to meander. You want to have some purpose in your meandering, which means that you really want to get kind of a basket of skills and experiences quickly, so you can cross things off the list really quickly. But you can also gather all kinds of experiences and skills that you can kind of tuck away in your pack and take them with you to the next role. And identify from those what you enjoyed in it and what you didn't enjoy in it, so that you can be sure to kind of separate those two things as you're moving along your stepping stones. So, I think that there are, and then of course you're sort of always learning. And then I think as you go, there are also some lucky opportunities that just come your way. And I think being able to recognize when one of those opportunities is in front of you is really important. Because you can do all the planning in the world, but then something comes along that, I've often said, I think Mark Zuckerberg was in kindergarten when I graduated from Yale. So there is no way when I graduated from Yale that I could have known that that is a company I wanted to work for, or that social media was going to be a thing, or any of it. You just could not have known. So I think you just have to kind of, have the confidence and awareness to know when there's an opportunity in front of you. And one thing that I learned from my very long time boss, Sheryl Sandberg, is, and I'm sure she would say this if she were here today, if you are offered a seat on a rocket ship, take it. Does not matter what seat it is. You got to recognize that it's a rocket ship, you should just get on. So those are kind of just maybe a long description of what I've done.
That's fascinating. Okay, because I think that moment when you have the courage to actually jump on the rocket ship is one that, Yale, we all get here, right, by studying hard and doing the right things in school, and there's kind of almost a risk aversion that's rewarded by that admission envelope. So how do you convince these amazing students that actually taking that risk is really the
So I think there are a couple things that go into it, and it's funny because I can think of at least two people who said to me when I was leaving to go to Facebook, "What are you doing? It's run by a 23-year-old college dropout who has no business model. They're going to be gone in a year. You're throwing your career away. This is crazy." But I knew, because I worked in marketing, and I had a buy on Facebook for trying to reach the college students. And I knew it worked. I knew the ads actually worked. So, I felt like I had a little bit of insight into it, so that was helpful. But I also think that it takes, just by the things you've already done to get here, and the things you'll do here and right when you leave, you're going to have lots of kind of goodwill in terms of your resume. And it really gives people, I think, a reason to take a second look and to say like, oh, maybe this is someone that we should consider. And I think having sort of the confidence that that will help you, and the confidence that you can learn whatever you need to know in any job, and the confidence that if it doesn't work out, you're gonna start over. It's okay. Like, you can still go get a different job if it doesn't work out. I think is that's kind of the most important thing. I was kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe, but if that means in a year I'm looking for another job, that's what it means. I don't think that's what it's gonna be, but that's kind of the worst that could happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I remember when we graduated, you mentioned the recession, there was sort of this sense that like you just had to take something.
Yeah, you had to take a job.
Like you say, take a job or go to grad school, which is of course what I did. But there must have been times, there's been so much growth and so many different sort of pivots along the way when there was sort of a struggle that you really felt like, okay, I'm kind of meeting my moment here where I have to, anyway, I just wonder what kind of you feel like gave you the strength and perseverance to see some of those tough periods through.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you always have good days and bad days. I will say there was a day at our first startup that I will always remember, because it was Friday night, and it was late on a Friday night, and we had just raised money, and we were waiting for the funds to hit our bank account so that we could make payroll. And we were literally lying down on the floor of the office, like thinking to ourselves, I really hope this money hits. Like, what are we gonna say to the team on Monday if we can't pay them? And so, you definitely have those moments where it's like, oh my gosh, this is either gonna work out this weekend or it's not. And we're either gonna have a business on Monday or we're not. And so, I think it's maybe less of it. I don't feel like I had a lot of confidence in that moment, but sort of, it does take some courage to go through some of those moments. And even as Meta, Facebook at the time, was growing really, really quickly, because there were, when I joined, there were about 500 people. We were in a bunch of different office buildings in Palo Alto. We had fewer than 100 million users on Facebook, which was a desktop app. It wasn't on mobile. And today, it's a very different company. Getting from there to here in 16 years took a lot of like, wow, this thing is growing faster than I can keep up with. Like, can I learn fast enough? Can I, hire enough people, build enough tools, kind of. And I think getting used to that feeling of I'm always a little bit behind was very hard, because that's not the feeling that any of you had getting here, right? I mean, it's a totally different mindset. And so kind of learning to live with that ambiguity and always feeling like you're running to catch up, I think it's just one of the things that you can learn to live with. But it doesn't mean it's like not hard or scary.
We still live with it. So, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about AI, and I wonder with Meta's strategy now, how do you see sort of the AI revolution, if we can call this particular cycle of it that, fitting into the company's strategy? I mean, if that's not a trade secret, I don't know.
Sure, yeah. So one of the frameworks that I learned in business school for thinking about your strategy is that you have your core business, you have adjacencies to the core business, and then you have kind of your bigger bets and things that you're investing in for the future. So, clearly for us, the core is really what we call the family of apps. So it's, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger. And we've actually been using machine learning and forms of AI to fuel that for a long time. It's what drives recommendation engines and allows us to personalize feeds and, present ads that feel more like content than an ad. And that's all been something we've been working on for many, many years, and is already it helps us actually to identify harmful content on the site. I mean, we use it quite broadly already. I would say the adjacencies are kind of businesses like Threads or products like Threads that we've just launched last summer. and where it's kind of like a continuation or it's kind of close by. You can think of something like the business messaging business in much the same way. It's kind of like an adjacency built on to the core. And I would say that our two big bets are really AI and the metaverse at this point. So, those are the two areas where we're really building for the future. And AI, again, like we've been working on it for many years, but now in this new era of Gen AI, it's really about making sure that we are building products that will be best in class and will really serve people who are using them really well, kind of be the best tools that you can imagine. Like you can imagine maybe having an AI assistant. If you're a creator, you could imagine AI tools that really help you in the work that you're doing as a creator. If you're a developer, you can imagine using the open source as a way to sort of focus on development. So there are lots of ways to use it in the ecosystem, and building the models is something that it's a race, an important race, and is definitely part of what we're focused on. And on the metaverse side, it's really about creating the next platform for kind of delivering social experiences where we create social presence. It should actually feel like you're kind of in a room with someone when you're using it. And one of the cool and exciting things is we're already bringing AI to that experience too. So AI is kind of throughout everything. I don't know if anybody's tried the Ray-Ban smart glasses, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's like you have AI with you. It sees what you see. You can talk to it. It's an experience that really gives you a sense of what the future holds, and it's pretty useful today too. So it's really a cool way to kind of imagine a form factor where you can take AI with you every single day, everywhere you go.
It uses some important quantum optics, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So is there, you speak of these, the products that have been released by Meta, and we experience them as very much like kind of fully baked. Is there a story you might be able to share with us about kind of like the first time you heard about one of these, or different ways that it took shape over a period of time?
So I think the most recent one that's been really fun actually, is Threads. Has anybody tried Threads? Is anybody on Threads? Check it out. It's a cool product. So we decided to build it at the end of 2022. And within 7 months, we launched the product. And there's kind of a how and a who. It was a team of less than 60 people, fewer than 60 people built it. It was mostly engineers. I think there was only 1 or 2 product folks and maybe a designer. They were people that had kind of been recruited from Instagram, Facebook, Messenger, and WhatsApp. They were people that we knew were scrappy people who could kind of like build something fast, who could work through tasks really quickly, and who could work well together as a team. And then we kind of just let them go. It was almost like a startup environment, but they had, the benefit of being able to build on the Instagram infrastructure, being able to use login, the login functionality from Instagram to help facilitate when it launched. But they released in July what was seen as a pretty basic is maybe not the right word, but kind of a basic product. It's like you were able to post, you could follow, you could like, you could reply, you could build a profile, but there were a lot of things that you couldn't do that you can do on all the other apps that people are used to. And then they kind of took the time to get the feedback, and they're building all of those products now. They're kind of building with the full feature set, and have been since July. And it's cool actually because the team is in Threads getting feedback from people who are using Threads, and they're using that as kind of ways to think about what happens next. And one thing that I thought was kind of a funny experience for me was that we had a launch date for Threads. I knew what the launch date was. I was in the office one day. I'm in meetings all day, starting early in the morning, ending kind of late afternoon. And late afternoon, someone was like, "Oh, we launched Threads today." And I was like, no, we're launching Threads next week. They were like, "No, we launched it today." And I was like, "Oh, how did that happen? How did I miss that?" And I was like, "Oh, I got to quickly get on there and be one of the first users of Threads." And by the time I got on at the end of the day, I'm user 9 million or something. I mean, it's crazy that I missed just in a few hours. By the next morning, it was something like 30 million people had signed up. And it was just one of those moments where it was like mind-blowing. I was like, how did this happen while I was just sitting at my desk all day? You know, and I kind of missed it. But it was fun to see that happen.
That's cool. So on the question of how we prepare our students to enter this kind of amazing tech world that you guys are all a part of, I know we've talked a lot about that, and I just wonder if you can share maybe just some suggestions or any kind of way that we both as educators, because there are some of my colleagues who are professors here, but also just what the students should be telling us to be focusing on.
Well, I think a lot of what you're going to need in your toolkit is stuff that you're learning in your classes. So I think that's like a great, really foundational place to start. I think your professors are doing a great job on that front. So you'll kind of learn a lot of that before you even leave. And almost everything else you're going to learn largely on the job in some way. So, I think one of the things that you want to be sure to do is to go work at a place where they have like a great mentorship culture and good coaching, and where you're going to have like a good manager and get good feedback on code or whatever it is that you're producing and working on, so that you can continue to learn and grow. Because learning and growing is really the most important thing you can do. I would say learning, growing, and contributing in some way is the way that you create opportunities for yourself. So, that's kind of what you want to do. I think in terms of positioning yourself, really be curious. Go out, and if you're curious about something, read about it, listen to podcasts, read the tech news, kind of get to know the products and the people and the stories. And there are a lot of podcasts that are excellent and free. There are some that are paid that are also excellent, but you can do it with all the free stuff. And, I think just being curious about what's happening in the industry really gives you a broader view. You can learn about policy issues. You can hear what the government is thinking. You can do all of that by reading and listening to all the sources. I think, kind of broadening yourself in different ways. So not just with classes, but certainly with internships or with research, or by being an undergraduate learning assistant. ULA, is that what you're calling it here? Yes, ULA. Those are great opportunities to spend a summer building something yourself, build a product yourself. All of those things I think give you kind of a more well-rounded body, just that adds to everything that you're learning in your classes, in your school. And then I think this is a great opportunity in your life to build your network, because you can go into the Yale alumni database. You can find people who graduated in the last 3, 4, and 5 years who are doing things that you think are interesting, or at companies that you think are cool, and you can call them or reach out to them, and almost always they will talk to you. They will talk to you. If you're just like, hey, I'm an undergrad, I'd love to have 15 minutes of your time, they will do that. And maybe not all, they largely will do that. And those are all people that then can kind of help you or teach you or guide you, or that you can go back to with questions at some point, like, I'm thinking about these 2 paths, what do you think? They'll go on to do other cool things in their career. You can stay in touch with them. So, it's not just the folks who are here in the program that you can get to know, but this is a really great opportunity to kind of set aside 15 minutes now and then to try to talk to other folks who are already in industry, who are just a little bit ahead of you in your career trajectory, so that they can they can kind of help you out. And I think those are kind of the main things. I guess the last thing I would just say is don't be too hard on yourself. Like, kind of give yourself a break. I think it's really easy when you're in college and you're surrounded by amazing people to feel like this person got that job, or this happened, I didn't get that, but and I think it will work out. It will work out. So, it's very competitive, but you don't, just like you didn't have to get into a lot of schools, you only needed one great school. A lot of life is like that. So, I think just kind of being resilient and being able, what's most important is picking yourself up after you don't get something that you wanted and moving forward anyway. So I think just having that confidence that it'll be okay.
Sounds like you're sort of already going to agree with what I am about to ask you, but at Yale and in engineering at Yale, we tend to think about, what's our distinguishing feature? How can we kind of get an advantage in recruiting? And we try to lean on the sort of breadth of the liberal arts, the humanities, and in some sense, places where folks are taking risks, like in drama and theater, stuff that brings in people who are kind of naturally performers. And I just wonder if you see that as an advantage from where you sit in terms of recruiting people. Would you rather see someone who knows all the details of, well, we were talking about BC calculus earlier, but the sort of technical expertise trade-off with this kind of broad liberal arts experience at Yale, in particular, which you know well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to have both, because the world is complicated and nuanced, and it's really important as you're building to be able to think more broadly about what the impact is, or what policy is, or what the law is, or if there isn't law, what it could or should be, and how you think about incorporating that and kind of doing the right thing as you're building, even in a world where government hasn't quite caught up yet, or there isn't guidance that would be helpful. And so, I think having that broader perspective is important. I also think the most important thing I learned at Yale, and I'm not an engineer, obviously, but the most important thing I learned at Yale was how to learn. And I think that's really what you take away most from your experience here, because certainly this has been true in my, in the last 30 years of my career. It will definitely be true for the next 30 years of your career. You will need to know how to learn, because whatever you're going to be doing in 10 years is probably something that doesn't even exist today, could be, or it will be in a very different world or a very different context, and you have to know, okay, you have to recognize there's a gap for me here, I have to learn about it. You have to be able to have that self-awareness and recognize it. You have to know how to study. You have to know how to ask the right questions. You have to know who you can get help from and how to do that. You need to be able to think critically about all of the things that are in front of you. And those are all things, no matter what you're studying here, that you're going to learn here. So that's, if you take nothing else with you, that is the most important thing.
There you have it, folks. So I'd love to open it up if there are any questions for Lori in the audience. Yeah.
Hi, Lori. Thanks a lot for coming here and giving the talk. My name is Billy. I'm a PhD student in the School of Engineering, doing robotics specifically. I guess you're probably the best person to ask this question to, since you're head of people. Because over the past few years, the tech market hasn't been the best for getting a job for especially people coming out of college, grad school. I guess from your perspective right now, from Meta's perspective, how is the market looking for this coming year and then maybe the year after in terms of recruiting in different areas of the expertises?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty different at each different place. So I'd say that the market for startups has been a little bit harder in the last few years, but that might be changing a little bit with AI. I think there's a lot of investment and dollars going into AI at this point from the venture community. And I think for the tech companies, they're always going to be hiring, but the question is just what's the role, what's the timing, what's the, how do you get in there? And I would say that if you're not going, you don't have to go straight to a big company. There are lots of startups. You can learn a ton at startups too. So I think thinking broadly about what your opportunity set is makes a lot of sense. I think there are a lot of benefits to a big company too. You can meet a lot of really great people that you can learn from who go on to do other cool things, and really kind of helps later down the road in your career, and it helps with your learning. But you're going to find great people at startups too. So I think just thinking broadly about what the opportunity set is. I was talking to someone actually who's in robotics, who's thinking about various robotics companies around the country. There's some cool stuff happening right now in robotics across lots of different industries, definitely in healthcare, but also in some consumer spaces and lots of stuff. So, I think particularly because you're a PhD student, you've really come a long way in what you're able to contribute. So I think just kind of, you gotta send out a lot of resumes, and you'll probably have to kiss a lot of frogs, but it'll be, you sort of get there eventually. So I would say don't be discouraged if you're not hearing back. Don't be discouraged if you're hearing no, just keep going. Because that is a growing industry for sure. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity. You just have to kind of find it for yourself.
Lots of questions.
Hi, thank you. My name is Maylee. I'm a current senior studying computer science and data science, and I have to make a big decision in the next week whether to attend Masters of Science in computer science or enter the workforce full-time. So I was wondering if you could speak to, when it comes to AI roles and machine learning engineering, specifically whether Meta distinguishes between those with bachelor's or bachelor's and master's.
Yeah, so I think, so in all engineering roles at every company, they distinguish between bachelor's and master's and PhD students. That doesn't mean that, so again, any path you take, you can go back if you change your mind or make a mistake. Just remember that. So it is a big decision, and it probably you're probably feeling the weight of it, but you can always go back to school or you can always go back to industry. I would say for AI though, this is a really fun time to be in industry. There's a lot going on right now. And we're at a moment in time, this happened with mobile actually in around 2012. There was just a huge discrepancy between supply and demand in terms of what companies needed and what talent was available. And we're going through the exact same thing right now with AI. So if you have an opportunity to go into industry working in AI, it could be really a lot of fun for the next period of time. If you feel like you could go back to school at some point, you may decide you want to or you don't want to after that. But I also think you can't go wrong learning more. You just can't go wrong because there's also a lot of amazing stuff happening at universities right now in terms of the research that they're doing, which is foundational for the work that's happening in AI. So, I think you're in a position where honestly you can't make a bad choice. But I think just, you may end up in the same place down, in 5 or 10 years actually, either spot. Because usually when you finish a master's program, you start a tiny bit more senior, like one level more senior at the company, which is about the time it would take you to kind of go to the company and get promoted. It's the way it's designed so that you can do either of those things as a learning mechanism. And so you probably will end up in a pretty similar spot down the road in any case, but it's just kind of what do you want to learn and what experience do you want to have over the next few years.
A couple up here.
Hi, my name is Angel. I'm a sophomore majoring in biomedical engineering and music. And my question for you is obviously throughout your career you've seen ideas that may have seemed too futuristic at the time actually become a reality. So what advice would you have for an undergraduate student who has an idea but doesn't necessarily know specific starting actions that they can take to catalyze this idea and have a starting point to jump off from?
Yeah, so the second startup I worked on, it was in 2002-ish. I think is sort of just coming to fruition now. That company didn't make it. It needed a lot of things that didn't exist at the time. It was too futuristic, as you're describing. And all these years later, it's sort of finally coming to fruition. So there's some chance that whatever you have in mind, who knows if the tools or technologies sort of exist at this point. But I would definitely look around and see if anyone else is doing anything in that field. You might be able to find professors or researchers or folks in medicine actually who are thinking about it. Possibly even one of the big healthcare companies could be thinking about it. And if you can find others who are kind of like-minded and you can team up with them, it might give you kind of an opportunity to have a little bit more traction. And if you want to start it on your own, I say that's awesome and you should go for it too. But then you'll have to go out and find people who are interested and that you can kind of, it's in part a sales job to sell your vision and get other people who have the right skills and experience excited to join you on the epic quest of starting a company or, trying something new. There's also always grad school is a great way to kind of find people who have similar interests and do research in those areas until things advance a little bit more. And you can contribute then to the body of knowledge actually as someone who's working in that area within a university. I think a lot of the most valuable tech comes out of universities. I heard about some of it today actually happening right here, which is very cool. I think there are lots of different paths to do it, but you might have a little better luck and a little more fun if you can find a few other folks who want to join you in one way or another. So either they're doing something that's kind of in that direction that you can join, or you get other people to join you. But I think it's cool to have that kind of vision and idea. And even if it doesn't happen in the next few years, you could actually find yourself doing that in 30 years.
And I'll just mention as a follow-on that we're sitting in Sci-City, which is a big investment in the part of the university to generate a group of people that thinks about these kinds of things. And we also have representation here from Yale Ventures that are also helping students and faculty take those kinds of ideas and turn them into reality. So it's a different Yale than when we were here. None of this was even talked about. So it's an exciting time to be here for that kind of thing. Oh,
Hi, Lori.
Hi.
Yes, good afternoon. Okay, thank you. Hi, Lori, good afternoon. So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned two very interesting things. You said, firstly, that you had the confidence knowing that what you didn't know, you could learn it on the job. And secondly, you said you have to have the confidence knowing that if it doesn't work out, that it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Now, I'm asking that specifically because you said when you finished with Yale, you more or less would have entered the job market at the time of a recession. So what did it take to develop that resilient mindset? What was that switch that flicked for you to say, hey, I can do this. I can take that seat on that rocket ship that's taking off now.
Yeah.
Could you give us some insight as to how to develop that mindset?
It was a bad job market.
It really was, yeah.
So really it was
We were
necessity. Like you had to take the job because you didn't know if you were going to get another offer. So, it was like, I don't know if I would have taken this job, but here it is, so I'm going to do it. And I think actually doing it and having it not work out and having to start over, I didn't have the confidence the first couple of times that it happened, but after you've done it a couple of times, you're like, okay, this one's not going to work out for whatever reason. I'm going to try the next one. I think the way people tell their career stories is not that helpful. I think it's often like, I started here and now I'm here, and it was like a complete straight upward line. And I think that's just not usually true if you get into the details. There's always anything. The company went under, I was laid off, I had a bad manager, I hated the job, whatever. And I think what's important is really how you bounce. It's like not what happens, but how you recover from it, I think is really the most important thing. And I've actually noticed this as I've gone back to reunions, which is that the people, tell me if you see the same thing, but bad things happen to everybody. It can happen in your career, it can happen in your personal life, it can happen any which way, it can hit you. And the people who kind of have been able to bounce back or try again from really hard things are the ones who have are now kind of doing interesting things and have, you can just see the difference. You can just see the difference when something really derails you and you can't get back on track. So I think the most important thing is just knowing something is going to happen and I'm going to have to get back on track. And I said having the confidence, but it's kind of like you just have to do it. I mean, you don't really have a choice. You have to get back on track.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Rudy. I'm a senior majoring in mathematics and computer science. Meta has a great reputation of assessing talent and companies with its purchase of Instagram and WhatsApp. But on your end, when it comes to managing all of this talent, what does that look like when a really talented team has to come in and join the greater Meta team? Like, what does that assimilation look like? And if you're a member of that team, what can you do to create impact or maybe develop your own brand now that you're in a new space?
Yeah. So there were, I'm trying to think which company it was. There's one company we bought that was 12 people when we bought it. I think Instagram was bigger than that. But, you know, I think you are sort of coming into this new environment. And I think the onus is both on the acquiring company and the company that's joining to both work really hard to make it work. And I think that I think a lot of times companies that are joining a bigger company want to sort of keep their independence in a lot of ways. And I think if you are in that chair, I think being open to the possibility that the larger company has resources or people or something that could be really helpful to you, and thinking about like, okay, what is that? Like, what do we need, and how can they be helpful? Kind of helps to bridge that gap. And I think the onus is on the company that is bringing you in also to be sure that the team still has some autonomy and can make some choice. I mean, part of the reason you are bringing them in is that they had something to offer. So making sure that you're getting the value out of that. And, you know, and over time, what you see is that the people from the original, you know, from the whatever company was acquired, end up kind of finding their way out in the organization. They'll switch teams, they'll go work on something else. You'll have some, you know, kind of back and forth, and through that mixing, they kind of all become part of the whole. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's a quicker process. A lot of it depends on the mindset on both sides, which is kind of like, you know, I wanted to join or I didn't want to join this other organization. I think the acquiring company always wants to make it work, obviously. So, you know, they're kind of starting from a different place. But I think if you're in a position where you're selling whatever you have to another company, for example, or joining another company, you know, I think it's really about looking for those opportunities, and you know, you always hope that kind of what you saw in the process of evaluating that company is what you're actually getting when you get there. That might not always be totally matched up either. So I think, you know, the communication is really important to be sure that you're getting what you want. But I think, you know, it sort of depends. Like, were you the founder? Did you join the team? What's your seat on the bus? But I think it's important just to, I really try to encourage people to think of things as opportunities rather than as a blocker, because I think you'll just get more out of it if you're approaching it with a positive mindset. It really depends on the specifics, and I'm happy to talk more if you're in the situation and have more specifics. I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Hello.
Oops, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, thank you for the talk. My name's Nishad. I'm a PhD student right now in applied physics. And I've been thinking about, you know, what life after grad school would look like, and, you know, having control over maybe creativity, both in a research sense, but also in, you know, the direction of whatever job I'm in. And I imagine, like, you know, for you joining the company in 2008 versus now, it was much smaller. Maybe people were kind of more willing to, you know, throw things into the wind and see what would happen, and there was kind of like an adventurous spirit. Do you find that that's like an easy thing to maintain in people now? Is that something that Meta looks for, like hires for, as just like a general guiding principle?
I think it depends what company and what team you join, because you know, a lot of companies invest a lot in R&D. And so, you know, what you're describing is kind of more of an R&D type role, where you still want to be able to do research, and, you know, and there are definitely companies that are going to be looking for that. So, and they'll be recruiting PhDs just like you. That's what they're looking for. So, I think in that environment, you'll have some creativity. So I think it's less necessarily about, not necessarily about the stage of the company, and more about like what is the company trying to get done in the world, and how much are they investing in R&D in the future, and what are their big bets. And I think kind of matching what sounds like you want to do against whatever the future bets are for the company is probably what you want to be looking for.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Joshua. I had a quick question about, you mentioned this idea of being able to learn is what is going to be like the most important thing for the next decades to come. And I think in your career you went from more of like strategy and finance at Disney to marketing, and then now to HR. So I think like very complete different roles within each of those companies that you were at. And so I'm curious if you have strategies or lessons that you've learned along the way that have been most critical in allowing you to be able to learn, to be able to adapt and be successful in these new roles. And even in your time at Meta, right, with how much the company has changed, how you've really been able to learn and continue to pivot even as your circumstances may have changed.
Yeah, I think being able to really understand what your skills are and what you learned in each experience is important to being able to kind of pivot into the next thing. Like, you would think that recruiting is pretty different from running operations or running marketing or whatever, but actually if you kind of go back to first principles, they have a lot in common. So for example, both marketing and recruiting are about communications. They're about kind of sharing what you have, starting at the top of the funnel and trying to get people through the funnel to a match. In marketing, you're trying to match them to a product. In recruiting, you're trying to match the right folks with the right jobs. So, it's actually not, it seems pretty different, but it's actually, and they both require kind of an operation to do it. And so, it's not, you can kind of identify the skills and the things that are the same and let go of the things that are super different, because those will get in your way. But if you can just identify the skills and the things that are similar and do those things, I think it sort of helps you get there in terms of thinking about what the next thing is. I think it's also the way that if you decide you want to pivot at some point, it's what you're going to have to do, because you're going to have to explain to someone else why it is that you're trying to go from function X to function Y, and all the reasons that those functions are similar enough in skill set and experience to allow you to do it. So I think that's, really being clear about what it is that you've learned and what your skills are, I think is helpful. Also takes a little bit of luck.
Yes, thanks so much for your insights. How would you characterize or describe Meta's corporate culture, and what are you trying to foster going forward?
I would say very collaborative is part of how I would describe it. It's really, we've talked about all of the different functions that have to work together in order for it to work. And I think having a team of people who, I think school is a collaborative experience, but I think a lot of people are surprised by how collaborative it is when they join a company. And I think, we sort of, it's not surprising because our products are social products, but it's a very social company in terms of the way that we interact and operate. For many years, we were all on Facebook together. So, when you join the company, you sort of got friended by 500 people who were already there, and it really mixed you in with the product. We now have a separate workplace product that allows you to do that just at work and keep your outside friends separate if you want to. But I would say very social and collaborative, and an environment where I have always felt like I am just working with the people who are the very best in their industry and their function in the entire world. And so that's just I am always just in awe and grateful that I have all these people to learn from. Actually, I didn't answer in the last question the how do you learn question, but I learned by talking. A lot of it's by talking to colleagues and people. I sat down with the head of infrastructure and said, tell me about chips and how they're made and how it works in silicon, and what do you read? What are you doing? What should I read? How should I learn about this? and they sort of give you ways to go off and learn all those different things. But it's a real, I would say, so in addition to being collaborative, it's a real learning culture. It's like a really deep learning culture. And I think that really comes from Mark, because he is a learner. It's what he does. He takes opinions from lots of different people and experts, and kind of hears different things, and then formulates his own ideas about the product or the future or what's going to happen or the vision based on all of these inputs. And it's really amazing when you talk to him about something that's in your area, you can see how deeply he's listening and asking questions on any function, And it's remarkable how deep he is on the tech, but also how deep he is on the business. And because he's a learner, I think it's created this like real learning culture where everybody's always trying to sort of just go deeper. We just launched a product internally that's like a Gen AI Academy. We just launched it, and it sort of takes people through the basics of what it is and how it works. And because part of what we have to do, since there's this supply and demand imbalance, is we have to train actually some of our existing very excellent engineers to work in the field. But what we found is that people who aren't even engineers are going through it, because we all have to learn about the technology. We all have to understand what's going on. It's a new language. Even if you're sitting in a meeting, you have to understand what parameters mean and what, all of these various things that are just like really completely new, even if you're on the business side, especially if you're on the business side. So, I think it's, so you have to go off and learn that stuff. And I think being in a place where it's both collaborative and focused on the learning creates this amazing environment where you really are always learning and getting better. We give a lot of feedback to each other, and it's meant to just make us all better. It's not meant to be punitive, and that's a learning tool too. So, it's a pretty open culture in which I feel like I get a lot of feedback, and that's great, and I think that is the way that we all get a little bit better. But I would say those are probably, if I had to say just two things, those are probably the things that really stand out to me.
I think I have time for one more quick one right here.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Sane. I'm studying biomedical engineering. I'm a senior. We spoke before. Thank you so much for coming. I'm applying to medical schools right now, but I've always, like even at Yale, sort of the tech space, entrepreneurship, digital technologies, it's always been on my mind. So I guess it's kind of a twofold question, but what do you see the role even of a social media company like Meta being in some of these healthcare and medicine roles? And what do you see people with MDs and like people working in the healthcare industry, what are their roles in turn within this sort of developing atmosphere of like technology and like AI, even things like that?
Yeah. This would be a great question for the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So, because that's a lot of what they do. So I think there are lots of ways that we see both doctors and patients and healthcare using social tools. Some of it is in places like rare diseases, where you can't find enough people to do research or to ask questions or to learn new things, but they find each other places like Facebook. And so they create these communities, or on WhatsApp or whatever it might be, but they create a community around a disease state that may not have as much research or understanding in it, or even something that does, but you're kind of new to the disease state, like you just found out you have diabetes, or you just found out you have cancer, or you just, and there are different flavors of all of those things, like I'm a parent and I have cancer, my child has cancer, whatever it is. And so I think using the social aspect to share information and learn things and to kind of share the experience is a way that you see people using it. I think the second part of the question, which is how can healthcare use technology, is like a super interesting question that we could talk about for days. I think there are a million ways. The second startup that I was part of was around technology and healthcare. And I just think that AI is completely going to change our understanding of the human body in ways that we can't even imagine. There are so many areas where we just don't, we know, Are there any neuroscientists in here before I say this? Like, we don't know anywhere near enough about the brain. We should know a lot more about the brain. And I think that with new technology and the combination of imaging and AI, we're really going to learn a lot about areas like the brain that we just haven't known or understood before, which is going to lead to a completely different level of therapeutics and kind of things that you can do for someone. And I think even just bringing all of the literature to the point of care, like understanding what the right protocols are when you're a doctor making a decision at the bedside, is something that's really hard. It's like surprisingly hard to do right now. But you could bring that technology into your practice in a way that I think would be really beneficial for both population health and individuals. So I think there's, and of course there's devices. There's, there are a million ways that you could use it. But I think that's a really exciting area right now.
Great. Well, Lori, I just want to thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thank you for having me.
It's
really
so
fun.
generous
Thank
with your
you.
time and your spirit.